been watching the Hobbit trilogy recently, and I remember really not liking it when it came out. Like, we went Christmas Day when they came out.
Now,
Six Flags Mall.
Yeah, when you say you don't like it, are you talking about all three films or just?
At the time, I was just really disappointed with the second one.
Okay, that's fair.
And I never saw the third one.
Oh!
So, like, I was so disappointed.
Yeah.
The first one, I remember being like, what's this orc plot?
I love the first one.
It's so good.
Yeah.
I do like it now. But, for being honest, like, I watched the second one the other day. And I'm reading through The Hobbit.
Yeah.
For, like, the 10th time right now, too. There's only one thing I don't like in it. And that's the weird little love triangle plot for Healy, who just looks like a dude.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't look like a dwarf.
Yeah.
And the elf lady.
Yeah. That's not even in the book?
Nowhere in the book.
Yeah.
But it feels just kind of gross, not well written anyway. But the rest of it, like all the liberties he took, I'm enjoying.
I do remember the first half of the book I really loved. Mm-hmm. Or the first half of the book. The first half of the second movie, The Desolation. No.
Yeah.
Is it Desolation of Small? Yeah, I remember liking that. I'm trying to remember where. Because he doesn't die in the second movie. He dies in the third movie.
He is in Smog?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he dies in the third movie. So, like, there's this really fun part in the first maybe third of the movie, and then that, like, the rest of the movie, I'm just like, what is going on? I like it when they're in the town area. That's fun and all.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I loved it until I read the book, and then I was like, that movie sucks.
No, I understand. I'm also like I'm about to watch Battle of the Five Armies after I finish the last few chapters.
Okay.
Because as a kid, when I first saw Desolation of Smog, I was like, there's like 5 pages on the Battle of the Five Armies. Why are they making that a whole movie?
It's a whole movie.
But I've never seen it. I'm going to go in with an open mind.
I think I would rank the first Hobbit, Battle of Five Armies, and then Desolation of Smog.
Okay, so the one I just watched, you rank the lowest.
Yeah.
That gives me some hope.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of hope.
Yeah. Now, there is the ending of the Battle of Five Armies. I'm like, that's kind of stupid.
Yeah.
Like, it is definitely more... We're like, Lord of the Rings, you're like, wow, this... I personally also rank the first trilogy of Lord of the Rings as Fellowship, Two Towers. Or, I don't know, Fellowship, Return of the King, Two Towers.
Yeah.
But I always love the Fellowship of the Ring. Like, I love that movie.
It's
I love the first Hobbit. I think those movies are fantastic. And the Lord of the Rings series itself really kept me engaged, where the Hobbit movie, the second and third one, just went,
a little bit more.
This could end and I'd be happy.
So speaking of books and taking a long time to tell maybe a few things, depends on the person telling the story.
That's fair.
We at Connect, we're doing something new for our congregation.
Yep.
I'm excited about it. I know a lot of people are. We're going to take the whole year to go through the book of Acts.
Yes. 27 chapters.
27 chapters.
52 weeks.
52 weeks.
Well, 50 weeks technically.
Yeah.
But
passage by passage.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say word by word. We do a few words each week. That'd be a couple years.
Yeah.
But
we have gone to a church. You and I both have gone to a church where we would spend 1 week.
Yeah.
Like a whole hour sermon on a singular word.
Yeah.
So we have practiced word by word sermon series, and they are a different beast.
Yeah.
I'm not saying good or bad because it depends on who's doing them, but I do remember going, this is a lot. Or
right, yeah. Like your reaction was sleep. So Jared, what is the point in the first place of taking time like this to go through a book of the Bible?
Yeah. So the biggest part of the thing is, the focus of Scripture when it comes to the local church is the gathering of the body and encouraging one another through Scripture. That's kind of one of the main tenet of what it means to be the church. And so going through these letters slowly, where in our culture we don't necessarily know exactly the context they were living in or what was happening in the time or day. And so to go through it more slowly than normal, right? More slowly than a week, to really understand what's being said, who's writing it, who's he writing it to, what's going on in the day, what does he mean by these certain words. And you can even stop and take time to go, hey, you might be reading this, but other translations it says this, and this is why these things differ. Mm-hmm. But how does it affect us? And obviously, with the biggest caveat is Scripture is always is something that builds off the one thing. So if you just read the book of Acts in one sitting, you're going to miss a lot of what's being built on.
Right.
And in order to best understand Acts 6, you have to first understand Acts 1 through 5. Mm-hmm. And so part of going slow is so that we can understand what's happening in chapter 1 and not just understand it intellectually, but apply it to our lives and begin adding to our normal rhythms of our lives in order that by the time we get to Acts chapter 6 and 7, where you start seeing the church being persecuted, we have some sort of foundation to handle that personally as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that makes sense. I can understand why it's important. Mm-hmm. Just practically speaking now, let's say I don't have the strongest attention span.
Yeah.
Not necessarily even for lack of trying.
Yeah.
But what if I'm not as excited, or I get a little more bored? Is there like
some ways, like, what do you do? So the big thing is, like, we're doing these big theological things right now at the church, right? We're doing what's called an exegetical study. Mm-hmm. So there's a thing called exegesis or eisegesis when it comes to Scripture, and one is when you exegete a passage, it means you're drawing out of the passage, like what is the passage saying about itself. Mm-hmm. If you eisegese a passage, you are focusing on putting yourself into the text itself.
Interesting. Why would that be bad?
It would be bad because so famous example that people will always use, and I think this is a great example of eisegesis, the thing we're saying wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's a good example of why it's bad. David and Goliath, right? People will tell that story like, this story, God is trying to tell you, you've got to slay your Goliath.
Okay.
Interesting enough, no, that story is really about David having faith in the Lord to do what the Lord has said he will do.
Right. Yeah.
That has nothing to do with you and I slaying our giants. Now, that doesn't mean that you and I don't need to be faithful and trust the Lord in what he said he has done. And will that sometimes slay you and I's figurative giants? Absolutely. But the focus goes back onto faith on God and what he has promised, not the fact of you trying to slay your giants, because that can turn into, I need to take out this giant loan so I can slay my whatever, or I need to do this so I can blah, blah, blah. And so it eisegesis turns to take it out, which is why we have exegetical and topical studies.
Okay. Before I ask you about exegetical and topical studies, tell me if you think this is a safe, fair, maybe a little bit pointed way to summarize the main difference between exegetical understanding versus eisegetical understanding. So if I were to do like you said and look at the story of David and Goliath and artificially insert myself into the story, I will lose focus on who really it's about, which is the Lord, and David's work with the Lord, and instead of taking that for what it is and learning what that has to say for me, I'm instead putting myself in their shoes in a way that's not healthy.
Yes.
Kind of just self-imposing myself.
Yeah, making yourself the hero of the story.
And that could be dangerous because that can turn what should be God-centered theology, biblical-centered theology, into me-centered theology.
Yes. Here's the reality. You and I are rarely ever the heroes in Scripture.
Right.
And there are times where it is specifically about you and I, about the saints and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But even then, it's about how we are confessing sin and how we have grown out of sin. So we're still not really the heroes
right,
in those moments. And if you look at biblical heroes, they're biblical heroes in really small segments, mm-hmm. and they're the worst people in very large segments, which is something we have to deal with.
Yeah.
But if you eisegete, which means you're just focusing on one small thing and putting yourself into it, mm-hmm. where exegete is you're taking the story in its totality. Mm-hmm. When we just focus on these small things, we could pick out all the best parts of the Bible that are easy to understand, that are mm-hmm. fun, and mm-hmm. all those things without understanding what's happening in the bigger picture of life.
Right.
And we're going to miss so much because we didn't look at the bigger picture of life, and we just worry about the small thing.
Yeah, it's like trail mix, taking out the M&Ms, forgetting all the
stuff. Gosh. I've never had trail mix.
Oh.
Because it has peanuts in it.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But I understand. That would be so disappointing.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
You'd be missing out on all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But
I guess for me, I'm missing out on trail mix.
If I'm being honest, it's been a long time since I've had trail mix. I don't know if I'm missing out.
That's like when I'm like, yeah, I can eat almond butter, but I can't eat peanut butter. And people are like, oh my gosh, you're missing out. And I was like, I don't know. Everyone's kind of moving over to almond butter anyway. So it seems like you jokers are just like, peanut butter isn't worth it.
Yeah, it's as a peanut butter boy. I can empathize with that. But a second ago you mentioned like topical and exegetical, or maybe line by line or passage by passage teaching.
So when we talk about exegetical studies, when you hear people say we go through the Bible line by line, verse by verse, word by word, it's from the word exegesis, which we get exegetical studies, which we're just taking these studies line by line, verse by verse, word by word, and we go back to this is kind of boring. Well, that's one of the negatives. This study can be kind of boring.
Right. It's not known for being flashy.
Now, the positive is you don't skip anything. So if you go, hey, we don't want to talk about this really hard topic, well, too bad. It's the next thing. So we're gonna talk about it, which makes some people excited. For me, I'm like, let's get to some stuff that's like questionable.
Right. Yeah.
Like let's get some stuff that I know we as a group are going to disagree on. Mm-hmm. I think that's fun.
Yeah.
And so there is that aspect, and then there's topical studies. Mm-hmm. And topical studies goes back when we're just focusing on topic by topic, and this is where you can kind of dive into is topical good or bad, blah blah blah. The reality is it can be good, just mm-hmm. like exegetical studies, and it can be bad, just like exegetical studies. Mm-hmm. With topical studies, the biggest worry is you tend to fall into that eisegesis or make it about yourself.
Yeah, it can become a reflection of the speaker more than the scripture itself.
Yes, and part of that is just because you and I. Not you and I specifically, but just we as people, mm-hmm. when we kind of panic or we try to relate with other people, we automatically put ourselves in those shoes. Mm-hmm. And that's not bad, but when everything turns to about that speaker, so after about 6 months or a year of hearing about how that scripture personally affects mm-hmm. or how it applies to that specific person's life, rather than just letting scripture speak for itself because you and I are different people, mm-hmm. it gets kind of boring. And that's why you have churches that are not church focused, they're pastor so and so focused.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned topical can be good.
Yeah.
It really can be a helpful tool.
Yeah.
But like with tools, a hammer is only useful for putting nails in.
Not screws.
Not screws.
Yeah.
Right. Or you're not going to take a hammer and hit your car tire.
Yeah. Or you shouldn't.
Or that depends, because now I'm thinking you could use anyway.
Yeah, you can test it out, see how flat it is.
They have their uses and their use cases.
I think someone in this room is currently doing a topical study.
Yes, the students and I, we're going through some history of the church mm-hmm. and looking at notable figures throughout church history. Yeah. My favorite part about it was when we voted for who we wanted to talk about. I sat with the students and read off a list of 23 names. We had to pick 10 or 11 out of those 23, and the ones they voted for were only because they had cool sounding names. And I adore that.
Yeah.
I completely.
And it worked out pretty well.
It worked out great. Yeah. All the people I wanted to talk about are in there. So, yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
But, again, I think that's an example of we can do topical well.
Yeah.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, the proof in the pudding is what does the content itself say?
Yeah. If you don't know Scripture, you'll never know what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I tell people all the time, if you've never read the Bible all the way through, you're missing out on a lot of, one, really, really good things, but also really, really hard things. There are a lot of things in Scripture that we go, the Lord would never say that. And somebody's like, says it right here. And you're like, well, dang, I've never thought about it that way.
Right.
And again, they're doing an eisegesis where they just look at the one thing and pull it out without the whole context. But there is things we have to work through that are difficult. And even in the sense of learning history, because the Bible is both a sacred text and somewhat of a history book. And so we have to do some more exploring than just maybe right smack dab right there in front of us.
Right. So, last question, and you kind of talked on this earlier, but for the person in the chair who's listening on a Sunday morning, and they want to take advantage of this opportunity, now that we're going through a book slowly, to be more engaged, to be fully engaged. What are some recommendations you would make?
Yeah. I'm going to go super podcast pastor right now and be like, here's my 4 things. Oh, well, actually, 3 and a bonus. How about that?
Please do.
3 and a bonus. All right. So my first thing is actually follow along. So we, as we go through the book of Acts, really easy way to do this. Just read the chapter we're on. Every week. Every day of every week, right? So right now, we're on chapter 1. I would recommend you read chapter 1 every single day until we're out of chapter 1. Right? Because at that point, for us, it's going to be 3 weeks. So you're to read it theoretically at the most 21 times if you read it once a day. But if you even read it half that, you read chapter 1 11 times in a very short amount of time, you're going to be able to recall it a little bit better. What I personally typically do is I read 3 chapters at a time. So I'll read chapters 1 through 3 until we're done with chapter 3. And then when we start 4, I'll read 4 through 6. Yeah, until we're done with chapter 6. And then so on and so forth. I'll read in 3s. That way I kind of get a bigger picture of what's happening. So by the time we get to chapter 3, it'll be, 2.5 months from now.
Yeah.
And that way I'm still remembering, oh, hey, remember in chapter 1 we did this, and now that we're in chapter 3, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. So that's my habit number 1, is to follow along in some way, shape, or form. Which we, honestly, in our bulletin and online, we'll throw out, hey, this week we're going to read this scripture on Sunday. So even if you just want to read those verses for the whole week, that works too. So follow along is number 1. Number 2 is take notes. Take notes in your personal study. And take notes on your Sunday sermon. Write down questions you have or connections that you see throughout Scripture, because this way it'll start connecting the bigger picture together outside of this. Especially for us, again, going through the book of Acts, when we get later on to Paul, right? His letters that we read later are happening during Acts. So that can help kind of ask some questions, and you can find those. And I'm sure we'll mention those things as we preach and things of that nature. So, second one, take notes. Okay. The third one is put the part of the scripture that we're on into a habit. Right? So every week there's going to be something in there that you can apply to your life as a habit. Now, some of them are going to be just the most simple of, I need to make sure I'm reading my Bible.
Yeah.
But when we get kind of to the evangelism part of Acts, well, you can add that to your life every day. When we talk about confession of sin, you can add that to your life every day. Breaking bread with one another in chapter 2, you can apply that every day. Living with your hands wide open, you can live that out every day. So a lot of these things, right now we're just kind of going through, hey, my name's Luke, and I'm writing to Theophilus. remember my first book that I wrote to you, which is the book of Luke. Well, what can you take away from that? Well, maybe you should go back and read the book of Luke fairly quickly, which you can probably read in a week. It's 16 chapters, so a week. And be prepped for when you come back to go through the next verses of chapter 1. So that way you're like, okay, so Luke is talking about, hey, I wrote you one letter. It's the book of Luke. Okay, I know what's happening there. It's about the Gospels. It's about the Sermon on the Mount. It's about Jesus' miracles, about his healings, the calling of the disciples. Because in chapter 1 of Acts, the second half that we're about to get to, we're calling out another one of the apostles. We're adding an apostle to this group because Judas has died, and we're taking on, spoiler alert, Matthias.
Yeah.
Which I really tried to name our son's middle name Matthias, and that didn't work out.
Oh.
So.
Well, his nickname either would have been Matt or Thigh, I think.
I don't know. Matthias also makes me think of, this is actually horrible, The Rock's character in the Scorpion King movies. His name is Matthias. So in my mind, I'm picturing my son being like 6'5", 250 pounds of just massiveness. And in all reality, I'm Native American and Irish, and my wife's family is from Britain. He won't hit 6 foot.
No.
So anyway, that's it. So put the part of scripture that we're reading and that we're studying, take some habits out of it, even if it's just memorizing it and looking to understand more. And my bonus one is find a book or other sermons on the part of scripture that we're on. Since we're in this lovely little room.
Are you looking for something next?
Not specifically. This book right here will work. I knew you had these here.
Absolutely.
Next to me. So these are the Christ-centered exposition commentaries. I don't know why I was trying to show the microphone this because it's not helpful. So these Christ-centered expositions, they have majority of the books written for different subjects throughout Scripture. They're very, very short. They're about a page to 3 pages long per section.
Like 7. It depends on the book.
Yeah, it depends on the book, how they break it down. But there's questions between each little chapter. And so these are just really fun, helpful tools. And as you see, this is part of Tim's personal library. Look at this guy. Humble brag. Yeah. There's lots of commentaries in here. You don't need to have a commentary. I have exegetical commentaries that basically I had to use when I studied Greek, and I had to read them in Greek and then translate them to English. It's very long. You don't need those. But this little short, this is short. 3 to 7 pages at a time is a big help. Finding other things. There's multiple books in this series, but also very similar to this.
You'd want to look up, I think these are technically called devotional commentaries,
yeah.
Which I would encourage, that is so much better than most devotionals that are popular, at least. But
yeah. Warren Wiersbe is another guy who recently passed away who does a lot of styles like this, but he does it in a way where they're fill in the blanks. So as you're reading, his is about 10 pages per section.
They're more question driven.
Yeah, this is to make you think about things like that. So really short, really cheap. These are typically anywhere from $10 to $15. So not going to break the bank. They're not a commentary where some of our commentary, I don't know, I've spent $100 on a commentary before. Singular commentary. Yeah. So you don't have to say how much you spent.
Thank you.
But also finding sermons, you can go from people around here like Matt Chandler or Dr. Evans, at Dr. Tony Evans specifically, because I know there's more than one Dr. Evans now. One of my favorite is Alistair Begg or Paul David Tripp. So you're finding a very trusted pastor, not a lazy pastor, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah. But finding a good, solid pastor who preaches well, or a church that preaches well. The Village isn't always Matt Chandler, but I've really enjoyed their other pastors, and that's just a bonus one. You don't have to do that. That's just what I did before I was ever on church staff, and I still do it now because it's something I could just download the sermon and just listen to it while I mow the lawn. That's how I listen to most sermons. Yeah, most of my life is when I would mow or go run or something like that. And again, I love these because my attention span is really short, and these are very short. So just as a recap, follow along during your sermon series, and by follow along, that means not just only on Sunday, but throughout the week. Take notes, right? Goes back to following along, but actually take notes of thoughts and questions and things that's said or things that you go, well, is that correct? I don't know. We're not perfect as pastors. Sometimes we say the wrong thing or incomplete thought, or our words get fumbled, or, like in our sense, we're teaching 3 or 4 times a week. So something may accidentally pop in from another part that we're going through. Put scripture into habit.
Yes.
Which I think is one of the most important things. This is not a seminar. This is not a classroom. There is a time and a place for that, but Sunday morning is not the main purpose of that. And then lastly, your bonus one is find sermons or books to help you understand the scripture we're going through.
No, that's all wonderful, and I can personally attest to all of those points being helpful in my own life. I think I like what you said best there. It's not merely a seminar, but this is for your whole life. We talk about scripture and life change, and we have to apply that for that to even be true. So, good word, brother. We'll catch y'all next time. I don't know what our topic will be yet.
It'll be Acts chapter 1 verses, I think, 7 through 15. I'll have to double check.
Yeah.
But we'll kind of go through Acts together.
Yeah. All right. See y'all later. Bye-bye.